What's happening, everybody? It's your boy Charles Wells, aka C Wells, coming at you with another edition of Swag Talk, the show where we cover the swag inside and out. And before we get started, I like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Ed Bonds for designing this background for me. I don't have it mounted properly yet, so my head's gonna be all in the way, gonna block a couple of logos. But I wanted to thank them for doing it for me. I really appreciate it. He's a Southernite, she's a Gremlin, a Ground fan. So that's what this SWAC love, hey, brings households together, and we come through and we represent for each other. So once again, thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Ed Barnes for designing this lovely background for me. I will have it properly displayed once I get it hung correctly. I just really wanted to get it up here so they can see I appreciate their work, and thank you very much for this. So just for the duration of this show, Alabama A&M Bethune Cookman, my head gonna block y'all, but it's all love from here. So with that being said, as usual, Wednesdays the Swag Talk Time Machine. We're gonna hop into the time machine and revisit the 2003 SWAC Championship game between Southern and Alabama State. The socials are down in the description below, so feel free to check out the Facebook page, facebook.com/SWACTalk, Twitter Twitter page, twitter.com/SWACTalk76, Instagram page, instagram.com/SWACTalk, and swagtalk76@gmail.com is the email address. Um, Swag Talk obviously is a podcast. That's where it all got started. So you can check that out on anchor.fm/Swag Talk, um, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Search Swag Talk, SWACTalk, all one word. You can check out any shows that I have that are located in the archive, any past shows. So you want to go ahead and take a listen to those. On the podcast, in case you don't know, I do more numbers based stuff. So it's a little bit more of a deep dive into the numbers and statistics and things like that. This is more just me talking and sharing my opinion on things. So um, coming up Sunday, we have a podcast actually dropping on Sunday. We're going to recap the Jackson State spring 2021 season. And we will also have a YouTube video dropping on Sunday covering that same topic. So if you want to hear my thoughts on the Jackson State season, um, check that out on Sunday. But since you're here now, if you haven't done so already, once you go ahead and subscribe to the page, we're up to 155 subscribers. Man, I like to thank y'all. This really, I know that don't sound like a crazy number, but for me, that number really blows me away because I just appreciate the love that everybody has shown for this. So I truly thank y'all from the bottom of my heart for doing this and supporting. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe. Go ahead and like videos, share them, hit that notification bell so you can be alerted to any content that I upload. Because although I do videos on Wednesdays and Sundays, I drop videos at other times depending on if breaking news happens or if I just have a topic that comes across my mind that I want to talk about. So don't be caught off guard by a video that's dropping if you're not subscribed and hit the notification bell. So with all that out the way, man, let's talk about this 2003 SWAC championship game. Um, One of the things that people always talked about when the championship game was formed and it was moved where it was set to be in Birmingham was that weather. It gets cold up there in Birmingham. It rains, it's outdoors, and one of the things that people always talked about was how would weather ever affect the game. And this game was definitely a game that the weather. I don't really think it had a huge impact on the game, but it was hella cold and it was rainy. So this was like you know not what you really want, but the game itself was more of a defensive game than anybody probably ever thought that it would be between the two teams. Let's look at the standings to see how both teams. And we're gonna look at the standings, and then we're gonna look how both teams got here first. Alabama State won the East Division with a 5-2 SWAC record. They were 8-5 overall. Alcorn finished second with a 5-2 record, and they were 7-5 overall. One of the things about Alcorn was about 2 or 3 years ago, Alcorn did not win a game, so they really had turned it around under Dr. Johnny Thomas for that period of time. Alabama A&M finished 4-3. They were 8-4 overall. Jackson State was 2-5, 2-10 overall. Y'all know that at the start of the James Bell years, that was not a good period of time. although Coach Comedy would come in and break that ship real fast at Jackson. Valley 1-5, 2-9 overall. Southern would finish number 13 in the FCS that year, well Division One AA at that point, but they would finish number 13 and they were 6-1 in conference, 12-1 overall. Grambling finished number 17. They were 6-1 in conference and 9-3 overall. Texas Southern was 3-4, 5-6 overall. Pine Bluff was 3-4, 4-7 overall, and Prairie View was 0-7 and 1-10 overall. So if you look at, you see the East. The East has always, for the most part, in the early stages of the SWAC championship game, been a three-team race. Alcorn popped up there late in the couple years. They popped up. They had some pretty good teams in the early 2000s. Um, you know, they just never really got over the hump at that point. So it was Jackson, Alabama State, and Alabama A&M kind of always fighting it out for the championship. Southern and Grambling pretty much had a lock on the West until 2006 when Pine Bluff would go. They would be the first team to not be a Southern or Grambling team to make it out the West. So Southern, let's start with Alabama State. They started off their season with a 38-22 victory over Florida A&M. They lost to Bethune-Cookman 31-26. They beat Alcorn 49-28. They beat Pine Bluff 24-22. They lost to Southern 35-10. They beat Jackson 27-20. They beat Prairie View 59-7. They lost to Alabama A&M in the Magic City Classic 20-17. They lost to Grambling 37-34. They beat Valley 55-31. They beat Texas Southern 38-26. And they beat Tuskegee 48-28. Now, if you see they lost the Magic City Classic to Alabama A&M, the only reason they made it was because Alcorn beat Alabama A&M at the end of the season, and that put Alabama State into the championship. So that was something that really helped them. They beat Alcorn. They beat Alcorn, so they finished in a tie for first. And due to the head-to-head matchup, they went to the championship instead of Alcorn, and they would, of course, lose the championship game to Southern by a score of 20-9. Um, a pretty good season for Alabama State. This was the start of the Tavares Jackson time period. May he rest in peace. Keldrick Williams was the running back. He was really good. Brock Dillon, defensive linebacker, was a beast out there. They had a really solid defense. They really played hard on defense. They hit hard and they played really aggressive. Carl Lucas was one of their wide receivers who made some big plays. And they just really, they really set themselves up. 2004 was probably a better year for them, and we'll talk about that next week. Southern came into this game. They defeated Valley 29-0 to start the season. They beat Prairie View 62-7. They beat North Carolina A&T 35-16. They beat Alabama State 35-10. They beat Pine Bluff 53-7. They beat Alabama A&M 55-25. They beat Jackson State 30-20. They lost to Alcorn 36-34 when Alcorn scored a last-second touchdown on a pass from Don Perry. Really, he was on the verge of being sacked, was able to get away, throw the ball deep in the end zone, and ruin Southern's perfect season. Southern would bounce back the next week and beat Allen 65-0. Lincoln, they defeated 34-7. They beat Texas Southern 24-17. And they beat Grambling 44-41 in a shootout Bayou Classic. And as I said before, they beat Alabama State 20-9 in the championship game. Now, with both of these teams, they both came in pretty not some style, but they were similar. They both had explosive offenses, had good defenses, and they kind of canceled each other out in a way. Was very high flying on offense. Quincy Richard had a bunch of receivers that he was throwing to that year. They threw for 31 touchdowns on the season. They ran for 30. Peoples was the running back. Him and Gerald Holmes, they split duties. Leon Miller was another guy that played in the backfield. They had Alpha Art, Chris Davis, Drayton Bridges. They had they had about 5 or 6 receivers that they threw the ball to. They really spread the ball around. Quincy Wheatshard had a huge season that year. And Southern was a very high flying offense that year, but Alabama State was able to really slow it down in this game. They hit Quincy Richard early and often. They actually put him out for a little while. Thomas Ricks, the backup quarterback, came in and filled in. But Alabama State's problem in this game was they could not finish. They dropped two touchdowns. They dropped, and they had one touchdown called back because of a delay of game. So they cost themselves 21 points right there off the rip. They threw an interception. I think they threw like two interceptions. They had a couple bad snaps. They had one snap that went over the punter's head. They had a bad snap that went over quarterback head that cost them yardage. But their defense really kept them in this game. But offensively, they just could never get out of their own way. And that was probably the difference between this game was Southern was able to take a 17-0 halftime lead. They scored early. They scored at the beginning of the first quarter when they returned a kickoff. I think it was 65 yards to put themselves in position. They ended up kicking a field goal on that drive. Alabama State would later turn the ball over. Southern would be able to get a touchdown off of that, and then they would get another touchdown after another Alabama State miscue and go into the half up 17-0. Alabama State would get a field goal in the third quarter. Southern would later get a field goal later in the third quarter. And basically, with not much time left in the game, Alabama State scored their first touchdown and went for two and didn't get it. So that made the margin 20-9. So it really wasn't, a offensive battle like you might have expected with two teams who both came in with offenses that could really put the points on the board. Southern was averaging over 40 points a game. Alabama State was averaging over 35. But Alabama State's defense was a really solid unit. Southern defense was opportunistic. They could be beat sometimes, but they did a good job of holding you down. Although I really feel like Southern was a team that beat you more with their offense than their defense that year. So Southern was able to complete their season and win their second SWAC championship game. Alabama State would have to wait a little while longer to win their first SWAC championship. Spoiler alert: they will win it the next year in another matchup against Southern. And I think the 2004 matchup was much more high scoring, but the game in 2004 regular season between Alabama State and Southern was one of the craziest games that you can see. I talk about it more on that episode, so I don't want to go too much on that. Say that for the '04 show, but like I said, this game didn't really have a lot of offensive action. It was just a game that I think everybody was really trying to get out of the weather. Southern was able to take a lead and hold that lead, and Alabama State just never could really get going offensively. They would get better, as I said, the next year and become more explosive. But this year they were probably punching over their head a little bit. Um, they probably honestly may not have should not have been there at this point, but I think they probably were a year ahead of schedule. They had some coaching turmoil to start the season. LC Cole was fired before the season, late before the season, and Charlie Cole took the job in like July or August, and he was able to round that team up and keep them informed. So they really played a scrappy brand of football, but they just didn't have enough to get it done on this game in this game. So this was the like I said, not a crazy offensive game like you would have expected from the two teams. 29 total points is just not very exciting. If that's what you're looking for. But just for the spectacle of the game, it was a pretty interesting game. It wasn't the best, but obviously it was good to watch. The '04 game is obviously much more high scoring. So we'll talk about that one next week. And that's gonna do it for this show. We're gonna go ahead and hop on up out of here. We'll be back on Sunday, like I said before, with our Jackson State spring season recap, both a podcast episode and YouTube video. So stay tuned for that. And until then, this is C Wells, and I'm signing out. I'll let y'all later.